Welcome to Feed the Trolls. We got another episode. I'm joined by Thorin and Pimp as well, because we're talking about Navi. They won the major this year. You know what we're going to be talking about. We're going to throw the word fluke around a few times as well. We're going to get into all of that. All the spicy takes are coming. But first, let's just start way back when last year. I think it was just after or just before Gamers 8 when we sort of had this international roster announced by Navi. I want to kind of go all the way back there. So to jump right into it, Duncan, what did you think when they announced this new international roster?
I mean, if you want to know, like, in the most literal sense, not like the sort of like general sense, what did we think? Like, I literally just thought, well, I'm a massive Aleksib stan and I love s1mple. So I was like, this is awesome. What do you mean? Like, so now, because at the time, obviously, I hoped s1mple would keep playing and be awesome. And then I hoped Aleksib just got to have s1mple now. That's pretty cool. If everyone's underestimated you and said you can't win, why not just have the best player of all time? So I would say, even for my joking answer there, which was my first reaction, I think that does actually hint at what my bigger thoughts were, which is I did think to myself, this is an incredibly ambitious project, though. Like, you have gone from all speaking in Russian and having Ukrainian and Russian players to a team where essentially you're going to put, remember, it was two Ukrainians at the time, it was Bit and s1mple, and no one knew how much English does Bit speak. Will he be okay? Obviously, everyone, I'm sure, was thinking things like, if Blade got to run this system, isn't that better with people who culturally have a similar background to you and played in your team? So I think, to me, I actually was very excited by the prospect. I thought it was a very interesting set of names. Obviously, they gambled on all those players who did well at Blast Paris, but I did think to myself, this is incredibly ambitious. So I'd actually even say the other team that I thought similarly of was the Liquid Super team. Like, again, you're making a team from scratch with all crazy, a million variables that could go wrong. But I think much like that team, if it goes right, though, you can see why everyone's hyped. Like, you can see why someone would attempt this project.
And for you, Pimp, I mean, what were your thoughts? Did you agree with Duncan at the time?
Yeah, ambitious project, no doubt about that. One of the things, that I thought to myself was the timing wasn't odd, in the sense that obviously we knew what was going on in the world situation with Ukraine, Russia, and all that kind of stuff, and that limited the options for Navi. I think to this day, had that not happened, then, probably they would have never gone that route, because I also do feel that the CIS scene is at a point right now, and we're at a point a year ago, 2 years ago, where they were, growing in strength, and you're getting more and more sick players, you're getting more and more, difference makers to potentially join Navi, and you could definitely have kept on with the CIS era within Navi, but circumstances wanted it differently, and for that, I think they made some ballsy picks. As I agree with Duncan, Aleksib being brought into the lineup, I like that a lot. Emma as well, I was a big fan of his, and I think the way he played during the Paris Major, it still puzzles me a little bit today why he hasn't been able to shine more, why he hasn't been able to replicate that, because I think his steady growth in Gamer Legion and the way he broke through almost during the Major in Paris was a natural course of the way he was putting in the hours and the work. So I think back then, initially speaking, it was an interesting project. It was something that I like to see, and also because you saw the tendency of the rest of the world, pretty much all good teams right now are international speaking teams, so you're also in a scenario now where s1mple gets freed up a little bit. Again, we didn't know that he was going to need a break, we didn't know that he was going to drop in a level, but to have him play on an international roster, maybe not necessarily in Navi, was interesting, but just the prospect of him maybe joining FaZe Clan or G2 or some other international team along the way as he got to learn that was what I was thinking to myself back in the
By the way, just for the lols, because some people might not have caught this bit, because when I did my interview with Aleksib, it's really long, it's like 4 hours long or something. Like, he actually mentions a detail that's very relevant to this, which is when this team was actually made and he got the invite to come join Navi and being like this weird international squad with all big names and s1mple. Apparently a friend of Aleksib's, as a joke, just said, like, well, isn't there that rumor that s1mple's going to take a break? Imagine if he just takes a break right after you've just joined the team. And they're all like, ha ha ha, yeah, imagine that. And then obviously it happened like almost immediately, like 2 tournaments. I think it's like 1 tournament in Ultimate Medal. Like, yeah, that's hilarious.
I hate to delve into rumors, and I'm basing this question completely off what I saw at IEM Cologne last year and just facial expressions and interactions behind the scenes. But it became, for me, it felt like, s1mple needed the break. He didn't like CS2, but I got the impression he wasn't the biggest fan of that new lineup either. Did anyone else feel that way? I will
say, I don't know who remembers this, but there was a weird detail. Actually, you might remember this, Pimp, because you were there. But I remember when people were showing those videos during the playoffs of this major, where like Navi had like won the semi, so it was like another celebrate, and then even after they won the major, there were a few clips where it was like backstage, you could see the players like meeting, and s1mple came twice and met. So obviously, like I think like when they won the major, he went straight to bit, obviously his former teammates. But there was like a weird thing what people might remember where it did look actually like s1mple almost like intentionally like ghosted a couple of the players. I won't say which ones, I can't even remember, but I remember there were a couple where it was almost like that thing where a bit like in football when you all shake hands at the beginning. Then if someone doesn't shake hands, it's like you've almost gone out of your way to not do it, to shun the guys. There was almost like an implication like that, Tech, like almost as though maybe he didn't pick this, or maybe when they made the plot, it was sort of like, but if you don't like it, you can take your break or something. I do kind of get that too, because I do personally think it's a bit weird you'd make a team like that, and then if s1mple was then just going to go AFK for a while, it just seemed like a strange beginning to the project, sure.
I think the only thing that could have saved that was if they were winning from the get-go. I think s1mple is he's a serial winner at that point, and I think increasingly he was growing frustrating with his own situation, not being able to live in his own country, maybe a little bit jaded, maybe not agreeing with every single player move that they were making, maybe not agreeing with the fact that he had to take a step back within the lineup as well to accommodate for Aleksib and accommodate for some of these new players. So I think it was the perfect storm that the only thing that could have made s1mple continue to play Counter-Strike was if they were winning from day one, and that was never going to be the case with this Navi lineup. So I wasn't really that surprised. I think these rumors about s1mple wanting to take a break, they come from a place, and usually, if there's smoke, there's also a fire somewhere. And it was kind of evident in the body language during Cologne, but also leading up to the tournaments, that s1mple was, I think, mentally, and it's always hard to speak on someone else's mental behalf, and you should be careful with it, but I do think that we could see that reflecting not only on the server and his performances, but also in the body language and the energy that s1mple would bring to interviews and to a tournament. You can think of what you want of s1mple. We've all seen the clips of him being harsh towards teammates in between maps, etc., etc. But that's when he cared. That's when he really wanted to win. That's when he was putting in an effort. And I almost saw s1mple who I wouldn't say he gave up, but he didn't have the energy nor the need to fight extra hard to get his point across, probably because he knew that it was only a question of time before he would get out of that lineup and take a break. So for my money, it was pretty evident that unless Navi would have won from day one, s1mple wouldn't stay for long within that specific project.
I like the way this went, because I was very worried I was going to become like Jake Lackey here, and we were going to be talking about this like falling out between s1mple and Navi that never actually happened. But I feel like we summarized it quite well. There was then obviously the step back, the replacement with Wonderful. Now we've got this lineup, and on paper, I mean, was anyone that excited about it? Did we think it was going to be? I mean, I'll say it. I didn't think it was ever going to be a major winning lineup when s1mple stepped down. Pimp, I mean, I know what your feelings are. We heard it at the major, but what were you feeling before that?
I mean, let me put it this way. Whenever I did analysis of Navi, the one thing I would always end up saying on a desk that they would steadily progress. It was a team that was trending upwards, but they were trending upwards very, very slow. And I think my expectations for the lineup was quite low, and at that point, then it's easy to trend upwards. They were doing some decent results. There was a couple of series where they would even lose a series here or a series there, but they would lose 2-1, and they would make the third map competitive. And you think, okay, there's some potential within this lineup, and it can go well. And maybe if it clicks all of a sudden, they can do a decent job. But it honestly has never been a lineup that excites me. It's never been a lineup where you like, whenever you watch G2 play, whenever you watch FaZe play, whenever you watch some of the better teams play, basically, there's always something that excites you going into the game. There's a player, there's a storyline, there's a tendency. For Navi, it was, I think the best way I can describe it is that whenever I looked at Navi, the most interesting part about that lineup for me was the coach. And that's pretty telling that the coach is, the guy that I look towards, for answers, and not necessarily the individuals, not necessarily the players. Don't get me wrong, Aleksib, I like him a lot. Emma as well, kind of lost hope by now, but the first 6 months I was still, honing in on the idea that he could replicate the performance from Paris. But more often than not, I would look at Blade and I would think, that's the guy I want to observe. That's the guy I want to see how he's addressing all this, how he's conducting himself, what he's taking away from the wins and the losses. And to me, that's pretty telling that it wasn't necessarily about the players, but more so about the organization and the direction they were moving in that carried the story for me.
Thorin, for you? I mean, what did you think of this lineup? Did you ever think that they'd be winning a major?
I did actually, to be fair, right after they added Wonderful to the line, do a hot take.
You thought they could win a major?
No, but on hot take point made, I did actually do a hot take that they would win one of the first 2 events with him as a player. Now, look, that's not a major. These were the 2 blast events. So, like, this is a way smaller scale. It's not like I'm not saying they would win. By the way, I never thought they'd win the World Championship. The joke is, I even had them on my pick'em in the final, and even I thought FaZe would win. So, no, I don't believe anyone, by the way, actually thought they would win. I think if you even go, fair play to the Navi staff, they go out their way in their interviews to make it clear this wasn't even their goal. Their whole thing was like make the playoffs of the major, keep gradually going up, like get the team together and stuff. So I don't think anyone was still at that. With that said, though, I do think like when they made this move, the only problem you had was the player going out. That was the only issue with the move. Like the player coming in is brilliant. Like everyone knows Wonderful's a good player. Obviously, he himself is even Ukrainian. He's an AWPer. We've all seen his game. He was clearly a player on the way up the ranks through the last few years. I actually have no idea what happened with him with Spirit and Sprout. That's one question I'd love to have answered. But how did this guy end up languishing out in Sprout? Somebody's way too good for that, especially because he doesn't seem to have any attitude problems. He just seems like a good player who just does his job. So when I heard he was joining, I was like, look, if you're going to have to get someone to replace s1mple, that's pretty good. Like, look, he'll never be s1mple. Like, the only player who maybe can be is m0NESY. And even then, by the way, I will just say a lot of the conversations at the moment that keep coming up of like, is m0NESY already better than Prime s1mple? It's like, you guys need to refresh yourself. You need to get on YouTube and get back in those 2018 VODs, mate. You're remembering the end of s1mple in this lineup. You're not remembering the guy from 2018. So I already get nervous when people do that. So look, he's not s1mple and he never will be. But I think the good thing about this team is there were more interesting details than just s1mple. It wasn't just like a one-man squad. So I'm with Pimp. I was more interested, not really can they win. It was more sort of like, how can Blade and Aleksib adapt to having this player? And, what will they do? Part of me even did think, by the way, there's a world where they're not as strong a team because they don't have the same superstar firepower, but actually removing the ego aspect of s1mple, since actually it seems to me like Wonderful's a pretty chill guy. I did also think maybe this will make the team structure work better, actually. So that was kind of my one hope, is like maybe the squad gets together. Because I'm with Pimp as well. If you ever watched this team before they won the major, whether they won or lost any series that they were in, it was always 3 maps. Like this team couldn't 2-0 people. It's actually why it was kind of cool when they did this last run at Blast, they did some 2-0s, because before that, it would always be such hard work for this team. It was always, you had to go to the decider. It was always like a 13-11 game or like overtime. So that's one of the reasons I didn't have the confidence. Kind of like what Pimp said there. It isn't a team that you watched where there's a m0NESY or a Zimu and you can just go, oh, this guy might just go 1v9 the whole game. They were always going to win as a team if Navi won. And because it was hard work, they didn't actually, funnily enough, to me, have the real dark horse factor that they would like surprise you and win a tournament. If anything, like that's a team you think of now, like Astralis. Maybe they just all frag out crazy in the game and they could beat anyone 2-0. Actually, this team, it was always like uphill sledding to even get a win. So I would never have predicted this team to win the major. I would have said, like, if anything, this is the team where it's like, you get to like 4th in the world and then you can't beat any of the teams above you. You just beat everyone below you,
Well, that's where it gets interesting for me, because you did say it right. If a thought experiment, and it may be a bit cheap to do now, especially knowing how to end it up at the major.
Sure.
But s1mple within that lineup, if you replaced Emma with s1mple, if you replaced Wonderful with s1mple, they wouldn't have won that major. And I've said it before. I've gone on record, and you even called me out for it, Duncan. That I think it was back in Blast in 19 or something, where I posed the question: could Navi be better without s1mple when he was in his prime?
Sure.
Right. And I think,
by the way, the edgiest take ever said on broadcast, and I think if anyone could grant you that status, it's me. So I'm going to give you over there. There you go. I'll give you the torch, as it were.
But I'll happily say it again. With s1mple on the lineup, they wouldn't have won that major. Because you're right. The only way Navi wins is as a team. The only way they win is trying to build up a foundation where they give full control to Blade, full control to Aleksib, where there's no egos within the team. Right. That's why Emma is also working so well internally within the team. That's why you hear every single player respecting Emma and really trying to cover for him, almost to a point where from the outside we can see that individually he's not delivering, but he's doing everything he's asked for within the team, and that's what makes the strength of Navi nowadays. And to me, anything, that's the interesting cultural difference, because Navi has always been around s1mple and Electronic. All throughout history, it's always been those two who've been the two carriers within the lineup. And all of a sudden, from one day to another, they lost Electronic, they lost s1mple, and they had to redefine what Navi is all about. Whereas it's a culture now, it's a club, it's a team that is trying to win, sort of like let's call it the old-fashioned heroic way, with Cadian also trying to make sure that it's all about the team and not about the individuals. So again, I'll heavily say it, and it's super fucking cheap to do so, but s1mple in Navi would not have won that major. He would have caused too many issues. He would have caused too many not necessarily him causing issues, but he would have taken too much attention and he would have required too much effort from the other guys around him to make him work to a point where he still weren't great enough in Counter-Strike 2 at the very least to carry that team to a major final. So it's not really a bad word against S1mple by no means, but it's more so also, I guess, a telling tendency of Counter-Strike these days that you can really build teams that focus on the team environment, that focus on the team play and the synergy in between the players. We've seen it with Heroic, we've now seen it with Navi, because you said it, a hot take, they would win one of the first 2 tournaments, were wonderful. When I saw that lineup, I thought if they get to be a top 8 team, that in itself to me is impressive, right? So they were nowhere near winning a major on paper, and they probably will be nowhere near winning a major ever again on paper with
yes,
this lineup.
Agreed.
We'll get back to this. I kind of just want to go off on a tangent now because this question is something that I've actually wanted to ask for a while. But I mean, does anyone think S1mple ever comes back to Counter-Strike? That's always been my thing.
It's like, in theory, that should just be like the easiest slam dunk question of all time. Like, does the greatest player ever, who, remember, this is how fast esports moves, guys. He was the player of 2022 in Counter-Strike. Like, people talk like, it was like pre-pandemic that he was good. Like, he was in the most dominant team at the end of 2021. And in 2022, he was the player of the year for HL TV. So I will say, it sounds ridiculous to even ask the question, like, can that player ever be in the pro scene? But here's the sad thing, Sam. Actually, what's weird is, because he both hasn't ever played officially in a real team, CS2, and that he did that one stand-in that just didn't look great, I actually, in a mad way, think that suddenly has become viable, that he might not be able to play CS2 again. Because his problem, essentially, is one of those, good problems to have if you're Navi, which is he's too expensive. So if someone signs him, they're not signing him well, does anyone want him? Yeah, loads of people want him. But the question is, would he join their team? And can they afford him? And the problem is, if you sign him at what I'm imagining Navi would think of his value as, because I said it wasn't that long ago, he was a top player. But it was only last year, remember, Pro League season 18, he was in the team that was in the final. That's 1 year ago. So in sports terms, it's easy. Every top team should try him. But I think in esports, people do think of the last 3 months, the last 6 months. So the main issue I think he's in right now, it's implied is, it's actually why, by the way, I also will link it to what I said earlier about those scenes he saw after the semi and then after the final. I think, I'm just going to say it right now, pure speculation, I think S1mple was at that major, Pimp, so that when they lost in the playoffs and didn't win the major, the next announcement was S1mple's coming back. I actually think that's why he was there, bro. I think that's why he was meeting people. I think the joke was going to be he was supporting them all the way. Then it really was sort of shit, fucking one. Because that's the one thing you can't have happen and have him come back, is it? Because minimum, you're going to have to, at a minimum, give them a few events after that before you can ever kick anyone. You can't boot someone after you've just won the major. So I actually low-key think his problem now is it feels like he's in a weird no man's land where it's all the teams he wants to play for might not want him or won't be willing to shell out the money. And so there's probably loads of teams, let's be real, I'm pretty sure all these teams OG would just sacrifice half the team to have him join, but would he join and do they have the money is the issue? So that's the thing that scares me at the moment is I feel unless he just comes back to Navi, which is obviously something we might discuss here, unless they just do pull the trigger and say we didn't have good results and we're bringing S1mple back, I don't know if there's any way he can go at the moment. You think of some of the other teams as well, people keep saying he can go to any team a la Team Liquid, maybe he could join Vitality or G2, but again, part of me just feels I don't think people understand what a blockbuster move that would be. That's probably $2 million signing fee. Then also, by the way, this is the thing I need people to understand. S1mple doesn't agree with you and me who watched that Blast Showdown. He's not going to join and go, yeah, I'll just start on 20K. He's going to also join and be the best player. He's going to be 70K a month, please, sir. So if you do it, you're essentially gambling almost your whole franchise on S1mple, which I don't hate, but then it gets not my money. So
yeah, true. There's 2 points to that, right? Following your logic with S1mple being at the Copenhagen Major, I actually never thought about it. Maybe you're right. Maybe that was one of the things that could have happened. And if that were the case, then I think Navi making the final at the spring finals was probably the worst thing that could have happened to the lineup.
Yeah,
we've seen it so many times. We've seen it so many times where teams do a good result and that buys another 3 months or another 4 months. Because now we show that we can do it and we work a little harder. We get to this level consistently again, and now S1mple has to wait another 4 months. I agree with you, Sam. I think the question is very relevant to ask because I would have said absolutely yes, he's going to come back at some point 6 months ago. Now I'm starting to doubt it a little bit. As Duncan said, there's different circumstances that can make it tough to land a deal for S1mple, and I also think there's a personal pride in it. And allow me to put in another sports example for you, Duncan. David De Gea. I know he's not the same caliber of player as S1mple were. He was playing in Manchester United. Goalkeeper of the year in 2022. You know where he was, right? He was on top of his game at Manchester United, at a very struggling team, 21, 22. His contract ran out of Manchester United. They didn't want to resign him, and he hasn't signed with a new team. And it's not because he's not great enough. It's not that he can't go out and find a top 15, a top 20 club in the world. He's just too expensive. And I don't think David De Gea wants to live that football life playing for less money that he earned at Manchester United. So at what point does S1mple think to himself, I've earned all the money that I need? He's probably reinvested it and done some decent financial decisions. He doesn't seem like a blokehead in that regard. At what point does S1mple think, do I really need to play Counter-Strike 2 to live on my life? Is that part of my identity, or do I do my own project with the whole training thing he's done? Or do I do different stuff? Or do I try Valorant? Or do I just chill and live my life for the first time in 25 years? So I think we're at a point right now where you can ask yourself those questions. And for that, I'm starting to doubt whether or not we get to see S1mple back. I will say it like this, though. If he doesn't rejoin a team within this year, like he cannot wait to 2025 before he starts playing CS2. At that point, it's going to be one of those comebacks like, no offense to Kirby, but maybe he's going to join, a second tier 2 team, and he's going to come back. He's going to find out he's not as good as he used to be, and he's going to lose motivation like that, because no one is okay with being an MVP major like Kirby was, come back and then stink at the game. Same for S1mple. He's too proud for that. So within the next 6 months, S1mple have to have joined a team or have to have found a place, whether it's Navi somewhere else. But if that doesn't happen, then I'm starting to really, really fear that we may have seen the last of S1mple at the very, very top.
I just realised, by the way, I'm actually messing up by being too fair, by even trying to do the historical thing. I should just go the other way and go, actually, you know what? This Modesty guy's better than S1mple ever was. If anything, actually, I want him to get egotistical and come back and prove it otherwise.
Exactly.
Show me,
I think it's beautiful, but I mean, that idea that he comes back. But the truth is, I think if he was smart, he retires now. And then we'll always talk about him as the greatest of all time. And there will never be another conversation around S1mple except that. But getting back into...
I'm willing to fight you on that one later, but let's see,
We're going to have that fight later. Here's the conversation we have to have, and it's the question that I have to ask, because I know that's why everyone came here. Was Navi winning the major a fluke, Pimp?
Well, here's the thing, Pimp, though. Technically, you didn't actually say on that broadcast, you never used the dreaded cursed word fluke. Or they were like, you just sort of implied like that they won, but that you wouldn't have them. You didn't think they would win, and you didn't think it would win again, right? So actually, for real, you have to explicitly answer that. Do you think it was a fluke? I mean, first of all, like, what do you consider a fluke? Essentially, to me, by the way, it just means it was unlikely you'd win. And like, for example, when they were in the quarterfinals, I always mention this. I think it was only me and like one other person on the pick 'em even had him in the final. Never mind. And by the way, no one had them winning as far as it was. So was it a fluke, the win, Pim?
It's a good question. It depends on how you define fluke, because I agree with you. It's a very negative connotation to the word.
Of course.
I do think in its essence, yes, it was a bit of a fluke. Obviously, I can't say that because it will just be interpreted in a different way. But I don't think anyone saw Navi winning. I don't think Navi themselves saw themselves winning. Yep. As you said, they even said it themselves. Making it to the playoff was already way above expectations for that lineup at that time. And I hate it, because I made a tweet about it as well, and it's been referred to on Reddit many times as well. But I was asked by Richard Lewis at that desk, whether or not I thought that they were going to build a new era or build a new dynasty, or if they could replicate that kind of performance. And instantly when he asked me that question, I was just like, no, of course not. Like, everyone should be able to realize that, of course, Aleksib jailed with the tournament of his life, Emma having a stinker, Bit all of a sudden waking up. Like, there was too many stars aligning at the same time during that tournament. You even had Spirit not playing up to their best, etc., etc. There's so many circumstances that make me feel that no, they're not going to be able to replicate that kind of performance, but that's not necessarily the goal either for them, right? I'm used to the phrase that I don't think Navi is going to be a top 5 team 6 months after winning the major at Copenhagen. And I know they've been out of top 5, they're now back into top 5, but that's where I see this lineup. That's where I see the strength of this lineup, that, if they can be a top 5, top 6, top 7, top 8 team that occasionally makes the playoff, maybe goes into a semifinal once in a while, with the budget and with the player material they have to work with, that is already impressive to me. That's already exceeding expectations from what I thought when I saw that lineup at the first time. So explicitly asking me, do I think it was a fluke? Not a mega fluke, but yeah, it was a fluke in the sense that I don't think that was ever going to be replicated by Navi. And I don't think any of the players themselves ever even thought that they were going to replicate that. I think if you asked Aleksib, if you asked JL, who's pretty honest, in the way he addresses some of these questions, no, he'd be fucking happy if you told him he goes to the semifinal at the next major.
Yes.
I think he'd buy that straight away. Of course he would,
Yes.
Of course he would. He's not going for the final again. He's not going to win it. That's what he has to believe in. That's what he's saying. But if you would sell him a semifinal at the Shanghai Major, they would take it instantly. So to me, that's enough of a great sign that it's not like Spirit, it's not like G2 even at that point. It's not like FaZe, who would only sell it for a final or even a win. Navi is a different caliber of team, different personality, different player material, and also working on a different budget.
Thorin, I mean, I think I know where you stand on this. You believe it was a bit of a fluke, right?
I mean, I wrote a whole Substack thing saying it was a fluke, and then I even then wrote another Substack thing where I wrote all the historical flukes and told every CSGO person who won, it's Cloud9, Gambit, Fnatic at the beginning. So I tried to make a pretty strong case, but I agree with a lot what Pimp says. Like, one of the biggest problems with this specific major is people think I'm only taking the fact that they won as the fluke. It's like Pimp just said there. Bro, like, the joke is, if you've watched him before and since, GL has never had a tournament like that ever again. It wasn't before, it wasn't since. By the way, a lot of people make this mistake. They think because of how great Immo was at the Blast Paris Major, they think GL, because Apex made the semis, was... No, GL's stats were garbage at that major. You can go back and look, like, they're nowhere near star player stats. In fact, one of the reasons why I think it's actually a cool narrative that he was the major MVP is I don't even think I don't even think he's close to the best player in Navi. In fact, I think if you look at his style, if you know my old model of a team, in my world, he's supposed to be sort of your third star. You know what I mean? In a dream world, this is why people want S1mple to come back. If you had Wonderful as your AWPer and they're like a strong rifler who people hoped Immo would be, or maybe if you had a S1mple, etc., then if you have GL, you know, time to time having a pop-off, that's where you probably have a championship roster team. So to me, the idea he not only popped off, but then you had that third map from Bit. I'll give props to Bit in this sense. Yeah. He did somehow actually replicate the same form at Pro League, even though he then went back to normal now. But that one map he had in that third map, like, this guy didn't do that the whole time in Navi since they had the international roster. That was some like 2021 bit stuff. Like that was impossible. I mean, the story even goes that like Aleksib himself was like, "What the fuck? Like this only happens in practice, essentially." So I do think there were too many factors that like sort of went in a weird way. I even think, by the way, the fact that you ended up with FaZe, even though for FaZe they were looking awesome, like on paper everyone else had Vitality or Spirit as the team coming out the other side of the bracket. And quite frankly, we do not know actually that Navi could beat those teams. We still don't know now. It's not the teams that they beat. So I think a lot of stars did align, as Pimp says. And also to me, it was bold to make this prediction after the mid. But we've also now seen the tournaments. Like, I would just say to someone who says it wasn't a fluke, either you just have to redefine the word fluke and you just don't think there are flukes and people who win, or I would just say look at the time before and afterwards. Like, I actually think this is a pretty good one, hence my historical reference to the obvious ones are Cloud9, who won the Boston Major, and DreamHack Winter 2013, the first one that Fnatic won. Because if you ever saw those teams, they just didn't win tournaments outside of that. You know, they'd win like a medium-sized event, or if they went to the next major, they'd come top 8 or something. Like, these teams actually showed in history that it was kind of a fluke. It was the one-off tournament that went awesome. I also do think an interesting detail I'd never considered, actually, is the expectations for Navi. Because to me, Pimp, if you win the major and you have people like Aleksib in your Navi, you should always be going for number one. You should be like being a top Premier League team. But one thing I hadn't thought about is that is also way more significant if S1mple is in your lineup. If S1mple's in your lineup, it's like, I'm Nico, now you have to try and win the major. Realize what we do with this lineup. But you are right. If you actually consider they don't have S1mple, I mean, let's be real. Since it's going to sound very negative this episode, here's the incredible upside of Navi. Right now, they don't have anyone close to a top 5 player in the world. You could even debate, is Wonderful even top 10? Maybe he's at the 12th best player if you did like a top 2, you know what I mean, or 15th or something. So to actually have that as your star, and not that many stars in general, and to be winning tournaments in 5, that's actually pretty impressive. That's why I'm with Pimp. I'll put a lot of credit on Aleksib and Blade Split for some of this, and then people who do step up individually. But I do think, I think it's clearly a fluke to me. But again, the real problem is this. Here's what you need to get out of the way at the beginning of the convo. I think when people hear fluke and they interpret negatively, they think it means like, you know, the Navi players just like threw a coin into a well, like, I wish we win the major. And then they didn't do anything to serve. They just sat down, and then it's like, what the hell? We just won. It's like, no, listen, like Pimp said there, it's more like you were a dark horse and you just got the best possible, like, set performances, run, the opponent played the right way, all the right things. So to me, let's just say it's very fortunate if people can handle it. I think it's a fluke. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, that's my issue, right? Because I remember saying that on the desk, right? Why is fluke such a dangerous word for us to use, you know, in our term box, so to speak? Being a fluke, sure, but it was still, you know, a great performance coming out of Navi. There was,
dude, I'll give you the best example, Pimp. Everyone who's European loves football, right? Yeah. I am a Liverpool fan and have been my whole life. I would tell you 100%, Pimp, that when Liverpool won that Champions League over Milan in 2005, that was a fluke. Like, the joke is, even I was watching, like, what the fuck is this? Like, that was an obvious fluke. So it's not a hater comment. Like, I still love that win, but I know it was incredibly lucky.
Take Greece at the Euros 2024 when they beat Portugal at the final as well. Of course, Greece winning the European Cup was a massive fluke. Doesn't take away from the performance in the tournament, doesn't take away from the achievement, but it's like when you use that word, it's almost like people at home think that, oh, you're taking something away from their win, or you're saying they're not as great as they are supposed to be when they win stuff.
I think they also think, because you're saying
Dumb
statistically it wasn't likely, that you wish it hadn't happened, or there's some weird inference like that. Which again, this is why the weirdest one of what people get mad at what me saying is, I'm supposed to be the biggest Aleksib stan of all time. Like, surely I'm loving the fact he won.
Sure.
It's just, I'm not delusional. I'm not like, they're now the best. He is the best as well. Like, come on, guys, temper it down a bit.
Yeah. Ban the word fluke.
I was going to have a little bit of fun. Yeah. Okay. No, originally I was going to set this up where we were going to define what fluke means first before we got into this. And then I was like, nah, fuck it. It's more fun if we just do it this way, because no matter what we do, someone's going to take offense from the word fluke. That's what makes it fun. What's interesting for me though, is I think it was during Gamers 8, S1mple had already flown home. Navi they're out of the competition, but they had an extra day. And I got to hang around with the Navi team to film content. And I actually stood with Blade and I said to him, like, what have you got to say to the fans about this lineup? Like, they're not happy with the results right now. And I'm paraphrasing him completely, but he basically was like, I need you to wait till Blast World Finals. Then I will have an understanding of kind of where this team is sitting, and we need to kind of have a top 5 finish. I think they had a top 4 finish. And then he was like, in January, February is kind of where we're going to be able to see what I'm working with. And they had a really good finish at Spring Groups. And I always think back to that, because I'm like, when they won the major, I kind of went, I feel like that man was way smarter than anyone actually gives him credit for.
Yeah.
Like, he was already sitting there going, this is where I kind of need them to peak, and then they'll get to where we get. And do you think that, I mean, if we're going to give credit, because the bottom line is they don't have star players. They're not the exciting phase or G2, but they did win the major, and they've still had some pretty decent finishes this year. They've had some horrible ones as well, but do we give full credits to Blade and Aleksib? I mean, is that why Navi is where it is, because of those two?
I think so. I think without Blade, this project would have never worked to begin with. And I think without Aleksib and Blade finding some sort of cohesion between them, it would have never worked. And we even heard in the beginning that Blade and Aleksib had different ways of approaching the game. That in the beginning, it was Blade giving all the tools to Aleksib, letting him run the team, letting him call the way he wanted to. And at a certain point, he had to step in because he was seeing certain things that wouldn't work for a guy like Bit, as an example, or that wouldn't work for Wonderful when he got into the team as well. So I think for the fact that they were able to work together and sort of like iron out the differences and then create a new, I wouldn't say a new play style, but a new way of practicing and running the team, that is the key to success within Navi. Because as Duncan said, they don't have a player that's even within top 15. I don't think Wonderful is a top 15 player in the world, by the way. I don't think he's even close to it. He also played incredible well when he joined Navi in the beginning. The last 4 events have been very mediocre for a guy like Wonderful. And even in those events, he is one of the players where I think statistically speaking, he gets a significantly higher rating that he has impact in certain of the games. He's very defensive, saving an awful lot. He's not the Monacy type of AWP player that dictates the game. He's good at reacting, good at closing down sites, etc. He has moments, he has clutches, but I don't think he's maybe top 15. That's around the ballpark area, right? Given that he has won a major. But if you're able to win a major without having a top 15 player on your lineup, then you got to give an awful lot of credit to your coach and your in-game leader. And I think, again, we spoke about the stars aligning. Aleksib had a horrible individual tournament at the Copenhagen Major, a horrible individual output. Emma, supposed to be the star rifler, horrible output at the major, yet they still won it, So a testament to that would be the system, the way they were setting up the players. Obviously, JL having a backup event, an event like he's never going to have again. But there was just so many anomalies where you look at it. If your in-game leader is having a stinker, if your supposed star rifler is having a stinker of a tournament, and you're telling me a team that wasn't even projected to be top 6 at the major ends up winning regardless of that, you got to attest that to the coach. You got to attest that to the in-game leader. You got to attest that to the system that was built around these players and whatever they had to work with, because there is no S1mple in Navi, and there's never going to be a player out of those 5 within the lineup right now that can never have the same amount of impact as S1mple had, every single event, almost every single map that he played.
What's funny is, if people won't remember this, but obviously I am famous for having quite a good memory, hence why I chose the historian path, believe it or not, right? But one of the things that Blade actually did say when he was the coach of Navi in 2021, so we all know how that story ended. By the end of the year, they essentially almost couldn't lose. That lineup lost 1 match online, if people don't know. It was that one fluke once a Team Liquid at that blast at the end of the year. Aside from that, they did win the major without losing the map. They swept all these tournaments. Famously, the joke people make, because it's kind of tragic, is it seems like the actual war with Russia really is what potentially killed that lineup or reduced how good they are. So actually reading one of those lines, we'll never know how good it was. What people will forget is this, Sam. When they first started making that the real lineup, and at the time, Bit was an academy player, and they were doing the Nivera in Vitality move. They would play him on certain maps, but then they're not on the other maps. And they were like, test him. When they were doing that and they started to bring him into the lineup, people will forget. Initially, Bit wasn't that good. He wasn't having that great stats. It wasn't until the Lance came that he exploded, right? And actually, Blade, if you go back, did something almost the same. Like, I haven't got it with me right now, but I have a good memory. He said something exactly like that, Sam, like, give me 6 months or so. It was some state like that. And then what's funny is at the time, even like Richard on By the Numbers, loads of people sort of wrecked him for this statement because they took it the other way. They took it as he's sort of actually saying, like, you know, you can't judge these results. Like, you know, it only counts in 6 months. It's all like, you know, he's trying to save his job or something. But I have to say, not only with that example, but now with this one too, I think Blade has actually proven at this point in time, he has like a system that he builds up, and it's not a very easy one to implement, but he needs his time. I notice he always implies in interviews that like boot camps are essential and you're going to get a lot done when you go there. And it's why if you ever look, actually, you can sort of tell which events Navi's trying to peak for, because that's the one where they'll schedule in the boot camp like a week before or whatever. And it's actually, here's the thing, because of the results, it no longer sounds like talk or some narrative. It seems like that just is this guy's approach. And once you've done it a few times, you have to kind of give him credit for that. Like with other IGLs or coaches, I would say, yeah, you know what? I'll give you 2 months, or I'll give you 3 or 4 events. After that, like if you're not good, you're not going to be that good. But I have to say, Blade might be one of the rare examples that is the exception to the rule, because he's kind of proven it. And like I said, that's why I give that example, because he's done it twice now with squads that both won the major. So he kind of, I think he's put his money where his mouth is. His system works.
I want to take something you said there, though, where you mentioned that you can kind of see when Navi's planning to do a deep run in an event because they boot camp before. And it reminds me a bit of traditional sports. Like you can't actually win everything all the time. You can't guarantee that your players are going to run, but you do plan to peak at a certain point. And I do think that Blade has got that down right. And I think that that's why they were able to win the major ultimately, because I think that he did peak them to the point where he needed them just before. But do you think that the second place now at Blast, I mean, is that just a stay of execution? Because it has been a little bit inconsistent. And like we've said, none of us really think this is a lineup that, it's not a lineup that we talk about when we talk about like the sort of big five and who we think is making these deep playoff runs. So, I mean, how long does it stay? Or are we all wrong?
No, I don't know. It depends on what Navi wants to do. I mean, if Navi wants to go for glory, if they want to take a bit of a gamble, then of course you bring back in s1mple, you try to reintegrate him into the lineup, and then as Duncan said, when you have s1mple on your lineup, being a third place finisher or fourth place finisher is not going to be enough. That can't be the goal. That's not what you're striving towards. You're striving towards to win the trophies. However, if Navi is okay and if Blade is okay with being a team that is, you know, top 5, top 6, top 7, occasionally makes the semifinals, maybe even make a final once in a while like they did during the spring finals. If that's okay, if that's the ambition, if that's what they're budgeting with as well, then fair enough. I think this lineup is doing quite good. So for my mind, it's all about managing your expectations. It's about finding out, you know, what is it we want to do in Navi? Do we want to make sure that our trophy cabinet keeps growing to a point where we can argue that we have won the most trophies in Counter-Strike history, etc., getting close to that point as well? Or are we okay with just being a team that is top 4, top 5, making the playoff once in a while? So there's a lot that goes into that. If I'm Navi and I want to take a gamble, you bring in s1mple and you go for the trophies. There's no doubt about that. It's a no-brainer at that point, despite s1mple having been out. But if you're okay with the way things are, and if you think your alternative potentially could be to bring in s1mple and you implode, and now instead of being a top 4 team, top 5 team, you become a top 10 team, and some of your pieces, key pieces from the time where you won the major is now going to leave because they can't work out with s1mple, or they can't figure out what the new system may or may not be, then there's also a trade-off right there. So I think for a lot of players, a lot of organizations right now as well, and it's something we don't address enough, I think, on the desk because we don't have time to it. But budgeting, you know, within Counter-Strike is becoming a real thing. You know, there's teams who have a strict budget from the beginning of the year. You cannot exceed that budget. And take Liquid as an example. Them signing Patsy and them signing Rainmaker, do you think that were the 2 players they wanted to sign? Do people really think that they were the 2 guys that they scouted out and they're like, this Rainmaker guy, he's going to be better than the rest of them? I think it was Yakinda said he watched a lot of demos with Depps and they were like, they isolate this guy. He's going to be the guy coming in. He was a cheap option. They didn't have to pay him shit to get him in. They didn't have to pay him a salary. That opened up some of the budget that they then could go and spend on Twist now coming into Team Liquid, right? So there's always a cohesion and there's a ripple effect in how you drive your team and how you manage your team at a certain point. The same could be said for Navi. Maybe right now they're getting the absolute maximum out of the player material. They're getting the absolute maximum out of what budget they're putting into the team. And if they at any point want to bring back s1mple in and maybe sign, I don't know, Perfecto, bring him back to the lineup. Let's imagine that, if they ever want to go out there and make big signings, maybe they have the budget to do so in the future because they were saving a little bit of money, working the best they could with this lineup right now. And then again, if that's the attribute, if that's how they're thinking, for my money, if you're winning a major, if you're getting to the final at the spring finals in London with a team where you know that you could spend more money and probably get better players and get better player material, you're doing one hell of a job as an organization running that team. So I can't really figure out whether I want to give Navi an awful lot of credit or if I want to be a little bit critical of them, of not, trying to risk a little bit more to become even better. So they enter the conversation of the spirits of the world and the faces of the world.
It's just interesting because they did win a major, right? And now they've come second at last. So I hear what you're saying, but I feel like if you're a fan looking on the outside or even the organization, you're going, hold on, like we are batting with the big boys. Like, what are you talking about? We're there. Like we are in contention, because I'm presuming they see it that way. So why is it that we keep looking going,
so was Leicester in the Premier
really.
League. They won the Premier League. They won the FA Cup the following year. And then Leicester found themselves in the Championship 2 years after. Right? If you're not looking ahead, if you're not constantly trying to better your squad, if you're not constantly trying to look at what you have to work with, and even if it's working, and I think, who the fuck was it who made Vitality, obviously, they win the major in Paris, Dupree on lineup, and they still go out, they sign Flamesy, they bring Dupree to the bench, they kind of get rid of him, they're proving for the future. They're also making a budget cut in the sense that Dupree is probably twice or 3 times the salary as Flamesy would be to join the lineup, but they're future-proofing their team, and they're doing it proactively. I absolutely love that move from Vitality. And I will say that as much as I respect Navi for what they've done, and as I said, I think they've done way, way better than they probably should have with the player material and with the budget they're putting into it. If you're not constantly trying to prove for the future, and if you're not constantly trying to better yourself every single time you have an option to do so, you will find yourself at a place where you're going to stagnate or drop back to where you're supposed to be. Right now, Navi is riding a high. They're doing great. But again, as I said, if you ask me, do I think Navi is a top 4, top 5 team in 6 months from now? No, I don't think they have the player material to it. And I don't think they're putting enough resources into to set player material in order to do so. Again, imagine Blade not being in Navi. Imagine him stopping tomorrow because, I don't know, he loses his eyes or whatever that may be. Then I think Navi is going to be in a hell of a different place.
I actually think it's worse, Sam, because here's the problem. I also think when they won that major, the reason it was so inconceivable they won at the time is because at the time CS was dominated by the big 3. It was FaZe Clan always in the final, and then Vitality Osprey, the strongest teams on their day, right? At the time you would say no, because they couldn't beat those teams. I mean, obviously they recently beat FaZe in that group stage game that was super close. But aside from that, they actually haven't even played these squads and beaten them, by the way, the big ends. And I actually think it's worse because the difference is, you look now, here's what we didn't have when they won the major. The Mouse team wasn't as strong back then. They were still percolating. You could argue the Astralis rebuild is way better at this point in time. VP's got the electronic into the squad. The real problem I have as well is the other problem you have in Counter-Strike. It's why I actually think the analogy of Leicester, and actually the better one, is easily the one with what was the analogy you gave earlier? What was the team that changed them? Oh, Dupree from
Vitality.
Vitality. I think that's also another good one. The reason why also sometimes you have to make the upgrade, even if you're number 1, is because that's what all the other teams are doing when they're not number 1 as well. Everyone else is also trying to be number 1. They're also trying to shift their roster and make $1 million signings. So I think the other problem you have with Navi is you haven't really shown you ever truly did belong in the top 4 to 5. And actually, if anything, there's more people coming. They're going to push you even far back. I'm with Pimp. If you mess around with this lineup and keep it the exact same, I actually also worry that you go the opposite way. It's not you stay 5th or 6th. You might come to 10th at that point, or 9th or something. And here's one other detail, which I think makes this incredibly tricky, what they do with the roster now, and no one else is thinking this one through, is people at the moment just think of it from Navi, do you bring s1mple in or do you keep him on the bench? The third option is you don't bring him in and he signs elsewhere. God forbid they're a team that's better than you now. What if actually he joins that team and gets really good and you've just made another rival? You're in a really tough spot if you're Navi. That's why I actually do feel a lot of this conversation about fluke and stuff. Well, the problem with that is they really need to have that conversation themselves and look in the mirror and say, look, if it actually was a one-off and this wasn't something we can build on or replicate, if we do want to win again, don't we have to make a player change? And then obviously the big question becomes, which I don't think anyone can answer, is do we bring s1mple in? Because it's the biggest gamble you can make. It might be the best possible move. As Pimp said, it could also be the worst possible move, because that's the other problem with s1mple, isn't it? We've always said his whole career, because the skill was such an insane upside and you were guaranteed the performance, we've all made a million excuses for the bad attitude. The problem becomes, what if the performance isn't there, but the attitude's still there? That's when it becomes a bit of a worrying prospect.
That is one thing with this Navi lineup, though. I mean, they might not be the pop-off superstar players, but they do seem to to have a good camaraderie. There's like a lot of good
certainly.
teamwork that's coming in. So what happens if you bring s1mple back and you have a bit of an attitude? Because then all of that falls away. And it doesn't matter how good s1mple is on the day. If the rest of the team is just miserable and not talking to each other, now you have an even bigger problem. I think it ties into the conversation we had with Kassad, where he said, like, sometimes you think replacing a player is the step forward, but you just replace it with like 7 other problems, even though you fix that one problem.
But there's also a different way of going with that. Let's say that they do get lucky and somehow find a way to sell off s1mple, release some of that budget, maybe get a big signing fee. You're now an international roster, so your world is your oyster in that sense. You could go out there and you can attract good talent towards NAVI. I think there's a lot of players who would like to play under the system of Blade and Aleksib, and I think that's one of the underrated factors we don't really speak about. I think that's why Sonic were quite lucky, joining Falcons as well, and what's the reason why they could acquire the players from Ents as well. If I'm a player and I think about it, I can get to work with Aleksib on the leadership of Aleksib, and I can get to work with Blade. He showed me he can win a major with the other guys that I consider myself to be better than. Why wouldn't I join that team, right? So I think in terms of the attraction power NAVI is having on the market right now, in terms of acquiring good talent, international talent into the international lineup, they're also in a pretty good spot in regards to that. So maybe bringing back s1mple is not the only solution or the only option. Maybe selling off s1mple if they can. I'm not sure if that's even viable, and releasing some of that budget, and then acquiring some of the other great talents that is out there, and trying to see if, okay, listen, if Emma is not stepping up, is there another player with the same qualities that we think can offer more to the lineup? We'll go and sign him. Same goes on for a guy like, I wouldn't say Jail. I think he's still doing one hell of a job, but there's certain players within that lineup that can't be too sure to be there in 6 months from now unless they start performing at a higher level than they are right now. So I do think why NAVI for me is probably one of the most interesting things to discuss is that, generally speaking, I think consensus between us is that they've done well, with what they have to work with. They've done really, really well. And for that, they deserve a lot of credit. But we're speaking in the sense that if they want to continue to do well, I still think something's got to change or something's got to give. And that can be hard for fans to accept when you're looking at a team. That can be hard for the players within the team to accept as well. As you said, it looks like a team that has great synergy. They like to be next to each other. When you watch them at tournaments, they're having fun, etc., etc. So you're also protecting yourself as a player, thinking, maybe I'm content with being, the 5th or the 4th best team in the world, so I don't have to deal with all that shit that maybe follows along being the 2nd best or the 3rd best, playing with a guy like s1mple. So I think there's so many interesting potential nuances in this discussion, and I think that's why the NAVI boardroom as well probably have had, similar to discussions that we're having right now, and probably also heated discussions. What do we do for the future? What do we do to future-proof our lineup and make sure that we are still a proper top 4, top 5 team for the future as well? I don't think this is an easy one at all.
One thing I think is really interesting is they're actually in one of the most unique positions I've seen of a team in years, which is if you think about teams like the obvious one is Vitality, right? Every Vitality fan / secret Zemu fan spends every event that they don't win, even if they're in the finals, even if they're in the semis, even if they look really good, they spend the whole event just discussing like which 3 players they're going to cut from the team, right? So the difference is if you look at Vitality, they have the opposite problem. They have the superstars, but if anything, people think they lack like some of the team structure or coherence. What's weird about NAVI is this. I also, in a weird way, the reason why I want to emphasize that I do think it's a fluke is because I also think this is a team where if you can successfully integrate 1 star player, you're already there. The rest is all there. We've all just picked up the system, the in-game leadership, the coach. They all seem on the same page. Like the base of how they play is actually like, look, it's not like it's super high level, but it's certainly like it's replicable. Like they play the same style out all over each time. That's why it's going to that 3rd map. They're going to win on this round. They're not the team that's going to win with pistols and stuff like that. So like, I do think like if you pick the right star, it might not be simple. I think it is the most obvious slam dunk. Like if you could bring 1 star, like an obvious, like pretty sweet. Early in this discussion, we referenced Twists, right? If people don't know, before he joined Team Liquid, suppose he did have offers from Vitality, Falcons that he was considering. I've heard that one of the reasons maybe why they're doing this move now in Team Liquid is maybe he also thought about leaving and going elsewhere. He's playing really good CS. You could imagine, mate, if you could bring in like a Twists and put him in a team like this, you're already there, aren't you? Wouldn't you already? You could like win the major book for reals, Yeah.
That is interesting, and that's where, as I said, like that's kind of holding my point as well. I do think NAVI is in a position where the attraction power they have to sign new talent is quite high, and I think certain players will also be willing to not ask for too much salary, not be too much of a diva, not ask for too big of a signing fee to join a team where you vision that you're working with Blade, you're working with Aleksib, you're working with a system that has won a major. And I have to say, right, from a player perspective, and it's been a long while for me, but I bet you some of these players are thinking this way. They're looking towards Emma, they're looking towards Jail, they're looking at Wonderful. And if you're one of the best Orbers out there, if you're m0NESY, you're like, double as good as he is. I'm
Sure.
twice the player he
Yes.
is. So if I join that lineup, we can definitely replicate that, right?
Yes.
That's the way a player thinks Counter-Strike, whether you like it or not as a fan. So I think there's a lot of attraction power right now going on for Navi if they were willing to risk a little bit, potentially making a move. If not after the player break, then, next time they bow out, at 6 or 7 at a tournament, and they realize that, top 6 is all we're going to be with this lineup.
I was going to ask you, Pimp, I mean, you kind of started on the answer, but then didn't finish it. I mean, who would you take out of this lineup? If you were given the opportunity to either bring S1mple back or to bring in more star power, I mean, who are you looking at going, we could afford to get rid of you?
That's a really goddamn good fucking question. That depends on who you can get. Can you get Monacy? Obviously, you get rid of Wonderful. I don't give a damn about that. I don't think Wonderful is untouchable within Navi.
Sure.
Who is untouchable within that lineup? Even Aleksib, I think as an in-game leader, the way he's working with Blade, he's done tremendously well. But from an individual standpoint, he's also over time now shown me that he's starting to lack a little bit more. And I think there's a certain fine line as an in-game leader where you can perform at a poor level as long as you have your star players around you playing well. The problem for Aleksib is he doesn't have that much star power around him. So you look at a Kerrigan in FaZe Clan, he can get away with posting a 0.80 rating at a major, and we won't really point fingers towards him or say it was his fault they didn't win. It'll still be Twist not playing well, or Broken not doing well enough, or Rob's playing under par. Whereas I do feel for Aleksib, when you have a system where you are reliant on every single player contributing at a certain level, where it's the team play and the synergy that is the essence of the team, then you don't have that much of a leeway as an in-game leader. So I'm realistically looking at Navi's lineup and I'm thinking none of these players are safe. Maybe Bit is the safest player within that lineup because you know what he can do, and he has a little bit of that pop-off power and doesn't seem to be causing any troubles, and he will take whatever role he's being given within the lineup, and does seem like Blake can just tell him to jump and he'll ask how high, etc., etc. So from a coaching perspective, that's probably nice to work with, but realistically speaking, I could remove 4 players from that lineup and replace them with players, of higher caliber. Obviously, you don't screw with the identity of the team, the system, etc. So you have to be very careful when doing so. But I don't really think anyone is safe within Navi if they were to go for the number 1 spot, so to speak.
How scary is it that we talk about this team that's won a major, second at Blast, and we say they're like none of these players are safe. Actually, they
are
all
safe
go...
if they want to continue with this. It depends on the ambition level from Navi. It entirely depends on that for me.
Can this lineup work? I mean, this is the other question is, I mean, we've said it enough. I mean, can you, in modern day Counter-Strike right now, yes, you've won a major, but can you continue to get into the finals with a team that doesn't have that firepower or that pop-off superstar? Is the structures here enough? Or is it going to be a very inconsistent run?
Even when they have those runs like that Blast run, right? Look, they did, as I said, in the group stage, beat FaZe in a close game. By the way, that's also when FaZe has had their slump, to be fair. FaZe themselves don't make the deep runs, right? It's not the same FaZe that was making the finals. They did also beat Astralis, who, to be fair, even though they were very hyped, haven't yet made the breakthrough, made a final or won a tournament. So these are like good results, but they actually don't have that many wins aside from that. I don't think people know this. Go back before the major. They're not a team that upsets people. Like, they actually were, before the major, one of the most reliable teams. If you look where they are in the world ranking, probably beat the teams below them, and they probably won't beat the teams above them. Because, as I say, it was a lot of hard work to win games. Even since they haven't had many big scalps, they haven't. There's another thing. People are acting like we're doing this. We're making them have this status as flukes. Like, they could have proved us wrong a million times and beat Team Spirit and Vitality. You could have won all the events, then we'd be looking stupid, wouldn't we? But it just turns out we know what we're talking about, so we accurately predicted what the state of the game is. So my problem is just that they haven't actually looked like that super convincing anyway with this lineup. So I feel like the major issue is, if you keep this lineup together right now, I think they're one of the most known quantities in Counter-Strike. I even think that they're not even a team that has crazy variance. You can actually fairly reliably, like here would be the joke, Sam. Essentially, I'm implying, I think part of how they actually made that Blast final was they also got lucky with the bracket. Like, when I saw that bracket, I was like, oh, they dodged all the other contenders. Like, they're going to be, essentially, they only had to beat VP, who themselves have yet to actually ever live up to that potential of the new roster. So you start thinking, who have you actually beaten? You know what I mean? Like, you go and look at, like, even a team like Mouse that everyone's criticizing, they've got some big scalps, man. They've had some of the best teams in the world they've beaten heads up on LAN. Like, Navi, to me, still has almost never done that. They've had the 1 or 2, and a lot of those were at the major. So my issue is, if you teleport them tomorrow to the Shanghai major and they don't get some crazy bracket draw, here's what happens. They probably make the quarterfinals and play FaZe or Spirit, and then they just lose, and then it's 58th, and it's like everyone goes, oh, well, the champions are out, and then there'll just be a footnote on that major. My problem is, I don't think if you keep this lineup together, they're in the final next time contending, and will they go back to back? In fact, I even think I would just say, if people think of the last segment that Pimp just did, where he accurately ran through that in theory, every player could be on the chopping block / replaced while they're the reigning major champions. That sort of tells you a story right there, guys, because I can't think of any other major winning team where everyone could be cut. Like, you'd usually have like 3 or 4 people you could never cut. You're only trying to cut one guy, you know?
That's true, and that's what's so messed up about it. I also do think that I want to agree with one of your points, Duncan, saying that it's not like the way Navi is winning. It's nice when they are winning, you know, but it's not like extraordinary. And the only historical reference I can give is heroic, you know, when they had the Cadian era and when they were getting straight into finals and certain, you know, all the time winning tournaments as well. When they won at Blast in Copenhagen as well, it was like you could see on the server how they were working in tandem, how they were working so well together, how it was such a well-oiled machine, and you'd be like, it makes sense when you're watching it. When I watch Navi win, it looks good and it to some degree makes sense, and you can see the foundation, but it's not at a higher level. It's not like this is something I've never seen before. It's not like they're re-innovating or inspiring a new generation of Counter-Strike players to adopt the way they're playing. It's just a very fundamentally sound team. As you said, a known quantity. You know what you're going to get. It's at a high level. Don't get me wrong. Navi is playing Counter-Strike at an incredible high level, but it's not something that is redefining that the way other teams want to look at Counter-Strike. I bet you the GM of G2 is not looking like we need to do more like Navi. We need to build a team like Navi's team, you know. Whereas back in the day for Heroic, a lot of GMs and a lot of players were like, I want to play on a team like Heroic. I want to be, you know, fluctuating. I want to be moving around. I want to be playing that team play Counter-Strike style. They don't have the same cultural impact, so to speak, to use another buzzword. So for my money, Navi's situation is unique. And I also do think that, you know, from a historical point of view, we've seen it many times where a team is popping off. They're doing well for anything for 3 to 9 months, and then normality will restore. And I think another thought experiment we can do to ourselves, and we can just quickly run it through, right? We all agree that Spirit, Phase, and Vitality, we don't really believe Navi is going to be better than them. And I'm not really sure whether or not any of those teams are going to meet roster chances. Then you have a team like Mouse. I also do think Mouse is a step ahead of Navi right now as a team. And then you look at G2, they're making a roster change. They're trying to better their squad, right? You look at a team like VP, as you said, they have recently made a massive improvement towards the squad. They're still yet to find that potential, but they're getting closer to it. So if you're Navi and you're looking at all the teams around you trying to make their squads better, trying to better themselves, and you're just sitting on your hands doing nothing because you want to make it 3 months ago, you risk falling down to the pitfall, as you said, Duncan, where you're just going to be the 8th best in the world, where everyone around you is trying to get better. Everyone is trying to better yourself, but Navi is not doing anything. So it does come at a cost as well. And I know the fans will be protective towards their favorite players within Navi, and they will be, you know, you can't say that about Navi, or how dare you saying 4 players could be cut. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to speak your case. If you want Navi as your club to be a good team for the future, you cannot sit on your fucking hands doing fuck all while everyone else is trying to make their teams better. It's as simple as that.
By the way, I want to flip it on you, Sam. I want to ask you if you think Navi should change the line, because you're doing that thing at the moment that all the hosts do. People know what I mean, which is you can always tell what the host really thinks because the questions just betray them. Like when you tell the host, like, no chance this team can win, they're an underdog, they're not even good. They'll be like, but is there a way that, you know? And then you're like, right, so we're fucking all story time now. So I want to get. It sounds like your bleeding heart tells you, oh come on, they won the major. Give them they just made the finals. Like give them one more. Would you give them until next major? Do you want to keep the lineup together? Do you think they could do you believe in the romance? Can they do it again?
You know what? I had this whole plan in my head because I was going to, after all of this, I was actually going to wrap it up with my final question being like, so basically what I'm hearing from all of you is that a lot of luck played a role in this. And then you both say yes. And I'd be like, oh, look, that's the word they use in the definition of describing a fluke. Because, and then I was going to
I've sabotaged that then, but you know, we'll roll with it anyway. It's all good.
I think that they have. I mean,
it's all good.
It was beautiful. It was going to be tied neatly in a bow at the end, but that's all out the window.
Probably segment of the year, really, but yeah.
Yeah, there we go. I mean, they have to change the lineup. I don't think it should be S1mple. I think based on just what I saw at Cologne, I think if you bring, I think S1mple is a bomb that will explode in that lineup, and I don't think that they'll all get along. That's what I think will happen.
Here's where we're different people. Because you know what's really sad? I can at least own this, Pimp, because I can own my toxicity, mate. You should be able to, surely, in your career, right? I totally understand that S1mple could come in and ruin the mental state of half the team and actually make people just never be good at CS again. But part of me not only is willing to accept that price because he is so good, but also low-key, I'll be low-key feeding off that drama too, like everyone else. Like, it would also be exciting, I can't lie. Like, it would have that days of their life quality, you know. Like, I'd be in for that part too, I can't lie, you know. I used to be the one watching those, like, what face cams a second they would lose the round in the old Navi with some Die Young or whatever. Like, The drama's also why I'm here. Let's be real.
Honestly, it's one of the best things when we do blast events, Sam, right? We have all the player cams in our green room. You can see all the player reactions 24/7 in the round.
Perfect.
And sometimes you see the funny shit. You know, you just see this player hates this guy, and this guy's like, 30 seconds into the round, someone drops a flash, and he's like losing his fucking mind. You know, so it's I kind of want to see that too, and it depends on who you're asking, right? As a fan, do I want to see s1mple come into Navi and implode the entire thing? Fuck yeah, let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
As a GM of Navi, do I think it's wise?
No, exactly. Yeah, listen, I agree. If I'm GM of Navi, maybe that isn't what I want, but I'm not. I don't have to be in the team, believe it or not, so I can just enjoy it from afar.
Well, this is the thing, because at Cologne, I mean, I'm full days of my lives, because I still remember when that Navi lineup was losing badly. Like, you've got all the photographers, all the cameramen, all the analysts on the side of the other team that's about to win. And I was right there in the corner because I wanted to watch the fight that was going to happen the moment those headsets came off, because I love it. But I don't love it for Aleksib because I actually am quite a big fan of him, and I think it's been a bit unfair. I think that they need to make a change. I don't know if s1mple.
Who would you kick then? What kind of change would you make? That's the thing, right?
Who are we kicking?
Fuck you guys. I mean, I think probably for me, I would say it's Immo or JL. It would have to be one of those two. But actually, I think it would be JL, to be fair, which I know is a bit hectic to say. But I think that Immo still has potential. I know, but but that's coming from a host point of view, and we all know hosts know nothing. We just ask the question.
No, here's the thing. I actually agree with you. I also agree with Pimp's take, by the way. In theory, the real point of that he didn't stress there was, it depends who the player coming in is. Like, look, we're all going to go, like, you can't kick Aleksib. Yeah, but the joke is, if, like Carrigan said tomorrow, can I join? Obviously, you're like, see, Aleksib. It'd be like there's knocking NIP for device story. Even you'd have to turn around and go, yeah, actually, you know what? I'll pack my bags. I'll be out first thing. I'll have a good time, mate. Like, you can't even argue with that. So, in the same way, right, look, people think I don't like JL because I don't like him. But that's irrelevant how he plays in the game. I actually think as a player, he's a pretty good player, especially because, as I say, I don't view him as a star. So I actually consider him like a pretty good player that can have pop-offs. That's actually, by the way, a good player to have in your team. But the point is, if he's going to be like the lurker, again, it depends who's coming in the door. Like, if you can, here's the example, right? If you tell me I can have like twists or something, well, that for something, then yeah, you know what? Maybe JL can get on his bike. Like, maybe it's worth it. But the Immo one, I actually do think, there's one point we can get into, because it's become a consensus even before the major because of his stats and the fact that when he was on that Gamer Legion squad at the Blast Paris major, Immo obviously had the fantastic stats. He could have been the MVP of the major. So everyone statistically knows he hasn't lived up to the billing of being the star aggressive rifler in this team. But I actually think there's a little bit more subtlety to it. It's not as simple as just kick him and it's obvious. Like, one thing I have been a little bit tortured about when I watch his game, Pimp, because I actually did like him when he was in Game League. I've even talked to the guy. Seems like he has a good head on his shoulders.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not even like he just is bad. Like, this is where the rating, I always thought, makes people get a bit lost in CS, because they act like the rating is like universally the same. But actually, one thing I do think in CS that doesn't work is you can't take one person's rating and another person's, because they might play a different role, they might have a different amount of resources. And one other thing about the way the rating works is because it calculates things like how often you die, do you save, etc. I think Immo, for me, is in a category a bit like the player config that obviously Pimp will know, which is even when their rating number isn't that good, sometimes the actual like kills per round can be like pretty good. It'll be like 0.72. You'll be like, hey, that's actually like, that's sort of like star fragging. Like, the guy must be getting kills in the game like that. Actually, by the way, if people don't know, you can't fake a stat like that. You can't go against tier 1 and have like a 0.7 KPR with a rifle and just be bad at the game. It can't be. That implies to me something like you're a bit lost in your role elsewhere. Like, maybe you get the kills, but you give them away elsewhere, or you can't build on it. You can't make it in the team. And that's the one concern I have with him. It's not stats. I don't go off the stats on that one. The concern I've always had with him actually is external stuff, like when I just look at him in the game, he just looks like he doesn't have poise, or like he himself looks a bit nervous, or like he doesn't seem confident in this next move. By the way, he's another player I think the face cam betrays all the time when they're having a bad game. He doesn't have the poker face. He can't make it seem like it's all good. So unfortunately, like, I think that story builds on itself. He'll have the bad stats in the game, so the fans are on him anyway. But then I also get the vibe he himself gets affected by the pressure, and all of this together, I don't think he looks comfortable in the game. So to me, that's one of the reasons I'd replace him. But again, it depends. Do I have someone who can do his role? Like, have I got like aggressive rifler in this team? Remember, they even wanted to be the secondary caller, so maybe I need someone like, that's why I suggested like a twist type play. Maybe you need someone who wants to also be a secondary caller. So I'm with Pimp on that one. It depends what player we're bringing in, because there's a lot of options. I don't think it has to just be like Immo or bust, you know.
They have to change something. They've got to put something in just to make it, like you said, a little bit stronger, and especially because they're not going to be competing with teams that have all, I'm presuming, going to use the player break.
We do know that. I think we're all pretty agreeing on think Do you think coming out of the play break, do you think Navi has the same lineup they do right now coming out of the play break? Because I do think so.
I think
Like,
they
I don't think
do.
they're going to change
I
anything. Yeah.
I don't think they'll change anything. I think that they'll have a
No?
really shitty run, and then suddenly everything will change.
Yes.
But
And that's the
it'll
thing.
be too
'cause we
little,
have
too late for the major.
We
Yeah.
have the qualifiers for the major, and we have the roster lock happening in what is it, like a month from now, 2 weeks from now. So if you don't change right now, there's no option for you, right? And the major is not being played before. Is it the 5th of December? The main part of the major is starting, right? So either you make a change right now off the back of coming second at the spring finals in London, or you don't make a change until the player break in late December, right? So it's a really complicated scenario for Navi, and I think given that it is so complicated, I'm afraid they won't make a change, and I'm pretty confident they won't make a change. But I think most of us would agree that it probably would be for the better. But then again, if they can convince themselves that, listen, we're going to take another 6 months where we have our, let's call it, budget international team. We're going to see if we can pull off another great upset or get into a final at a certain tournament, maybe make the playoff at the major, and that would be enough for us to be satisfied. Then coming December, maybe that's when you push the s1mple button, or that's when you push, bringing in a Twist who's continuing to not find any success in Team Liquid, asserting the market a little bit. But it's a really complicated timing for Navi, given the roster locks that are so early, given the qualify for the major are very early compared to what they usually are.
I was already scared that just winning the major means they probably give you the run back just to see if you can do it again. Because, the superstition element of here's the problem that people don't think about if they're a fan as well. Obviously, we all want them to get a better roster and win the next major. But you have to remember this. What if they change rosters, then don't win the next major? And then someone in Navi's going, oh, what if I'd kept that same roster and give it another try? You got to at least get them defense. I get why that's like a temptation. It's not a stupid one. It's, long term, it might even be something you end up being glad you did. My problem is, I agree with what was said earlier. Sadly, if you're an RV fan who does want them to improve, I actually think they're making that blast final to end the season was the worst thing that could happen. Because that mixed with beating FaZe and winning it just made you believe, maybe they should have another chance. And so I would agree that did buy them the 3 months extra. And as Rip says, 3 months gets you to the point where you're basically all in for the major anyway. So at that point, you just play in the next season with this team, probably.
It's a stay of execution. Of course, they could announce tomorrow that s1mple's back and I wouldn't have edited this episode, and then the joke will be on us. So there you go. That could happen.
I hope he just flames you, maybe, because you did say you didn't want him to come back. I hope he just goes, you know what? And who is this fucking tech girl? That would be iconic. I'd love that.
Think about all the interactions on Twitter, though. I can make some money. That's how I think about it. But
by the way, Pimp can let you know if you say some outrageous shit about s1mple, you will get interactions on Twitter. I can guarantee you that. You might have to press that translate button, which I would suggest you don't do, but you will get interactions. I'll give you that.
Swear to God, death threats 6 months after. It was fucking crazy.
Fantastic. I live in Africa. I'm fine. I'm going to do it for the cash. There we go.
Okay,
Let us know what you think is going to happen to Navi. We'll be back for another episode soon.